That's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll think I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but I'm just kind of big for it. Hiya folks, Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion, and this time I'm discussing The Final Planet by Andrew M. Greeley. At least I'm going to assume Greeley. This book was published in 1987, and it is almost exactly 300 pages long. And as always, I'm going to start off with the summary of the book. It's a bit of a longer one. Xylong. From space, it looks beautiful. It'll be the final planet for the men and women of the pilgrim vessel Iona, members of the Holy Order of St. Bridget and St. Brendan, who have followed the spirit of exploration faithfully. Now their ship is a battered hulk, good for only one more landfall. It mentions that it's a battered hulk, but it doesn't actually seem like it's in terrible shape, just getting old. But anyways, still, even with survival at stake, the pilgrims must obey the rules of their holy order. They must not invade an inhabited planet. They must be invited to land. And a bit of a spoiler alert, but that sort of kind of happens, but sort of kind of doesn't exactly happen. So I felt like they kind of fiddled around with that interpretation a bit. And like the pilgrims, the Xylongi, interesting name, are Earth-descended human beings. That's the problem. The Voyagers don't know enough about the Xylongi to approach them directly. The answer? The Holy Captain, Abbess Deidre, well, that's ironic concerning one of the recent book discussions I did. Deidre Cardinal Fitzgerald sends Samish O'Neill to Xylong in a one-man ship. Disguised as a traveling troubadour and all-around space bum, he's to spy on the Xylongi and report back to Iona with his ESP powers, weak at best. Seamus, an officer in Iona's crack fighting force, is a good soldier, very good. But a spy? No way! He's a bard. Second rate, his shipmates say, and a young man eager to find a proper woman. He uses that phrase all the time, mind you, to love and share his life. But he's no diplomat, and he's not subtle. It's hard to be subtle when you're 6'1" and have a bright red beard. And the reason that matters is because the people are fairly short in contrast. Once on the planet, Seamus finds the society more baffling than he has ever known. The people can be friendly, the women are lovely and loving, but everyone seems bound by rigid rules and restrictions and hemmed into the fortress-like cities. Why are there so many soldiers when the Xylongi say there is no enemy? And how do the planet's aborigines, the ape-like horde, fit in? But Seamus is distracted. He meets the magnificent Lieutenant Margetta, the proper woman of his fondest dreams. From the instant he sees her, he is in love. And she'll have nothing to do with him, until she saves his life the first time someone tries to kill him. What's going on Xylong? Seamus finds the answer stranger than he could have ever imagined, and more dangerous. It'll be a miracle if he and Margetta come out of it alive, much less pull off a safe landing for the Iona. So starting off with this book discussion, I will mention that unlike some of the other ones I've been discussing lately, a very common trend I've been running into is this actually only follows one person's perspective. It stays first person all the way through instead of jumping between 2 or 3 people's point of views. And I should give a little bit of not clarification, context. The background of the character Seamus and the ship he's traveling on, his shipmates, they seem to have a Celtic or Gaelic background. So instead of being a more neutral group of travelers from Earth, instead of being what I think is stereotypically like an all-American band, the A-Team, a group of heroic Americans with our stereotypical values, they have a very specific sort of personality and mindset. They tend to be a bit, they're not genuinely morose, but they seem to have pretty dry humors, self-defacing humor, pretty sarcastic. Excuse me. And so they might make comments that seem very, you know, I'm so heartbroken and torn up. But it's just, I guess, sort of like a natural reaction, a way to vent, to, you know, just be a bit morose, be a little bit of a pity party, but then bounce back real quick. And it's like, okay, need to get on, let's get on with it. And I will admit that I think the book did a pretty good job of what it was set out and aiming to do. It does take the time to develop the character, his background and the setting of him on the ship, how he interacts with some of the people there, what their culture and what their society is like. And then it dumps him down onto the planet Xylong, and you get to see that contrast. You get to see his interactions on this new world, seeing the differences. So whereas on the ship, the people there were more laid back, fairly casual, on Xylong, excuse me, and on the one hand, when it comes to getting things done, being driven, motivated, and getting your tasks taken care of, it seems to be pretty lackluster. But on the other hand, when it comes to the way the society functions, it's very rigid, it's very strict. So at birth, you're assigned a certain task that you're going to be doing, because, you know, they analyze your behaviors and your mindset and your attitude, your disposition. And the people there are only allowed to have a certain number of children, like 1 or 2 in their entire lifetime. In theory, even their how often they're able to reproduce or have sexual relations with each other, you know, married people, mind you, that is strictly limited. It's only at certain points in the year, and otherwise everybody, and I mean everybody, is supposed to be completely chaste. And of course people break that, but that is in theory what's supposed to be taking place. And if you're caught, then the punishment can be quite severe. And I will admit that I appreciate, with the main character's point of view, that as he was interacting with this new world and he was making those sort of analysis, as he was analyzing things, that he was making those self-comments and thinking to himself about how things could be really distorted, and how, I don't know, I just really appreciated all of the comparing and contrasting that was taking place, because it seemed very realistic. It seemed very believable, because in part that's what his mission is supposed to be. As a spy, he's supposed to be seeing how compatible the two of them would be, if he'd be able to fit in, if they'd be willing to take in the inhabitants of the ship. And then, you know, on the ground, he's supposed to be figuring out, you know, what are the actual situations like? Because on the surface, everything might seem to be fine, and they're going to want to put their best front forward, but if you start scratching beneath the surface, you start asking questions, if you start prying, well, it turns out that things aren't quite so rosy as it might first appear. Now, if you were to keep your head in the clouds and keep your head down and not ask questions, then things might appear okay, but yeah, if you're being observant and thinking things through, then it becomes clear pretty quick that things are amiss. And the other thing I somewhat appreciate to an extent, is that he was fairly candid, and as he was interacting with this different people who, how to put it, because on the ship the inhabitants were more or less very homogenous. They had the same, a very limited range of DNA or genetics, and I don't mean they're inbreeding, but they're all Celtic. They're all fair-skinned, red-haired, and again, I don't know if they're all literally red-haired, but very Irish, very stereotypical range of traits. And then as he's interacting with this new group of people, they're shorter in body stature. Their skin tone is darker. And how to put this? I could see this being a negative, that he would be objectifying or sexualizing the women, fantasizing about them, and I'm not praising that, but I guess I appreciate the candor that if you were, a young, able-bodied man, if you found yourself in a new environment, a new world with inhabitants that were so different from what you're used to seeing, women that could be described as exotic, I could see that being very fascinating, enticing, and interesting. And so it did get old after a while. There were certain mindsets and things that he said that were repetitive. It happened a little bit too much. But I guess overall I did appreciate that it seemed very realistic, very human. It felt as if I was reading about a real person. I guess that's the best way to put it. It just seemed very three-dimensional. It seemed very, it seemed pretty fleshed out. And I think I'm going to leave the general storyline fairly general, or fairly vague, as opposed to going into more into spoilers territory, because I thought this book was worth reading, or I guess that's the way I'm going to phrase it. Is I recommend this book overall. I would definitely put this into the borrow it category. How to put things? It covers a science fiction area pretty well. It deals with, on the one hand, it's advanced technology because it's dealing with a spaceship and exploring a new world, not necessarily for colonization, but for them to inhabit and share with the locals. But it doesn't go so far into that science fiction heavy realm where there's just gadgets and gizmos and all these super sophisticated technologies where that becomes too preeminent. It is able to deal with exploring a new civilization, a new society, learning about it, I think in a very good way. I know that that's a very specific situation to deal with, but I've read a few books where a person is going into unfamiliar territory and they're having to learn about it, they're having to make those adjustments, they're trying to figure things out, and this seems to be one of the better depictions of that situation that I've read. So I think for that reason alone, I really appreciate it, and I find it to be a good recommendation for that reason. And I would admit one criticism that comes to mind is that the protagonist puts himself in situations where it didn't seem like he really should have been able to get back out of them, that he probably should have bit the big one, but he had a bit of plot armor, and I think part of that was just to build a little bit of tension to make the conflict, to kind of spread it out a little bit, to have some tension, but I think it just demonstrated that he had plot armor and was overall necessary. Those few moments could have been erased out, and it wouldn't have diminished the storyline at all. And I think just maybe one or two other issues I could probably point out, or criticisms, but I think that's that was kind of one of the bigger ones for me. And his overly repetitive mindsets, what he kept saying, thinking to himself, that got a little bit dry, a little repetitive. But otherwise, I enjoyed this book. I might even say, I think it would be worth buying just for a good. I just recommend it. Buy it or borrow it. I'm just spinning my wheels otherwise. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed it, folks, and I'll see you later. Bye. Abrupt, but I need you to shut up.